My name is Serenity. I'm 34 years old, currently living and working in Seattle. That day, I wore the simplest dress I owned and held an umbrella for guests, standing on the freezing grass in Colorado during my sister's 10-year wedding anniversary celebration. When Austin, her husband, gifted her a $2.5 million villa and said in front of hundreds of guests, "It's thanks to her that I've thrived at Green Corps." Everyone stood up and clapped thunderously. As for me, the one who quietly designed the clean energy strategy for that very company, no one even remembered my name. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, dismissed at the exact moment when you should have been recognized? If you've ever felt the sting of being overlooked, leave a comment under the video. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and come with me as I continue this story. Because what happened next, none of them could have imagined. I graduated with honors in environmental engineering from the University of Oregon, with a thesis that made 3 professors rise to their feet and applaud right in the middle of the defense. Everyone in the department thought I'd follow the expected path, join a major energy corporation, land a 6-figure salary, attend meetings in glass buildings downtown, and eventually become an executive by 40. My family expected that too, especially my mother. "You should apply to McAllister Energy. Rachel said they're hiring," my mother would remind me at every dinner. She read the news every morning, scanned the printed paper at noon, and never missed a finance column in any publication. She believed success needed a specific shape, a respectable job title, an ID badge with a recognizable logo, and a house big enough to host the entire extended family for Christmas. But I chose a different path. I used 3 years' worth of savings from my graduate research work and a small loan to start Blue Root Strategies, a renewable energy consulting firm focused on small towns and sustainability-driven startups. Back then, even my friends thought I was a bit of a dreamer. And my family? Don't even ask. The startup fantasy, my mother called it. I still remember the night I sat at my parents' dining table, spreading out my first business plans, explaining the solar integration models I was testing in a small town called Glenview, about a 3-hour drive from Seattle. I talked about helping farmers lower electricity bills, using local energy sources, and how small changes could add up to big environmental impact. My mother just looked at me through her reading glasses, fingers resting on a glass of red wine. "You don't have a husband. You don't own a home. You don't have any real assets. So tell me, Serenity, what does your career even mean?" I remember staying silent for a long time. Rachel just smirked. With her glossy, curled brown hair, always dressed in on-trend outfits and carrying a purse the entire town knew the price of, she never believed what I did had any real value. She was a senior manager at Westridge Bank, where clients called her a strategic financial advisor. Her husband, Austin, was director of strategic development at Green Corps, one of the largest energy corporations in the Pacific Northwest. In their eyes, everything I did was temporary. "Serenity's always been into all that green stuff," Rachel teased, "but not everything green turns into money, sis." I swallowed all of it. I didn't argue. I just kept going. When Blue Root landed its first clients, I felt like I'd come a long way. Even though the work was demanding, income unstable, and I often worked until 2 or 3 in the morning, I still felt I was building something meaningful. One day, I received an invitation to present at a regional climate conference co-hosted by Stanford University and the Washington state government. It was a huge honor, a rare opportunity to share the model my engineering team and I had developed, a renewable energy forecasting system that helped residential communities save up to 40% annually on utility costs. I called my parents and invited them. I spoke on the phone, but I imagined my mom smiling at the news. I pictured my dad sitting in the front row, nodding as I spoke about sustainable transformation potential. I'd prepared for that presentation so thoroughly, I didn't have time to feel nervous. I printed out slides, bound them by hand, and placed each booklet on every seat. I chose a white blouse, gray slacks, tied my hair neatly. I arrived 2 hours early, checked the sound and lights, and stood in front of the restroom mirror for 5 minutes to calm my nerves. The presentation started at 3 p.m. My parents didn't arrive until 5:10, I was talking about integrated battery storage for a residential community near Yakima when I saw my mom slip in, followed by my dad. She wore sunglasses indoors, phone in one hand, leather purse in the other. She sat at the back row. No clapping, no eye contact. Not even 20 minutes later, I saw my dad gently tap her shoulder. She nodded. They stood up and left in the middle of the most important section, our statewide expansion roadmap. I tried to keep my voice steady, but my heart felt like it dropped out of my chest. That night, I called my mom. "I saw you left early," I said, trying to keep my tone even. She replied, "Yes, sorry, but Rachel had a charity auction for the city hospital fund. Very important. Austin was scheduled to speak. The whole room was waiting for them. I couldn't let her go alone." "What about my presentation?" "I saw it. You spoke well. But serenity, events like that are for young people to talk about. Ideals. That doesn't feed you. I hope you understand." I didn't say anything else. That night, I sat alone in my tiny office space. On the wall was a hand-drawn solar grid map I'd made for a mountain community energy project. It was raining outside. I drank cold tea, opened my laptop, and kept working on the financial report for a small town called Elmore that needed an energy-saving plan for its fruit processing plant. And I thought, maybe Mom was right about one thing. No one else was going to feed me on this path. But I would keep going, because if I didn't, who would show these communities what was possible? Who would prove that doing the right thing didn't need family applause to be worth pursuing? I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, stayed true to my values, things would eventually get better. But life isn't that simple. 3 months after that conference, Blue Root lost one of its largest contracts with the town of Meadow Ridge, where we'd been helping deploy solar systems for a low-income neighborhood. The project was more than halfway done when it was abruptly canceled. A new mayor had taken office. Budget cuts followed. The email they sent was only 4 lines long, thanking us for our noble ideals. The reality? I lost over 60% of revenue overnight. I kept calm, rewrote the financial plan, laid off staff, and outsourced remaining contracts to partner firms. But when I opened my fridge and found only a carton of almond milk and 3 apples, I knew I had to do the hardest thing. I sold my beloved car. That old Subaru had taken me across states, up to the northern mountains where I worked with indigenous communities surveying wind turbine locations. It had been there for the first contracts, those lunches in the rain, eating sandwiches in the driver's seat because I couldn't afford restaurants. But I sold it. I packed up and left my tiny apartment in suburban Seattle, moved into a weathered wooden cabin by Lake Stevens, a place a college friend was renting out cheap. No phone signal, no automatic hot water, only bird song, lake breeze, and wind through the pines every morning. I lived there alone. Woke up each day at 6 a.m., boiled water on a mini gas stove, brewed coffee using an old ceramic filter my mom used to own. Then I sat at a wooden desk, opened my laptop, and rewrote the entire data framework I had once dreamed of in college. No clients, no staff, no one waiting for my reports. Just me and a dream of creating an energy analytics tool, smart enough to predict renewable flows, optimize efficiency for small communities without expensive infrastructure. There were nights I stayed up almost until morning, fingers numb from typing too long in the cold air, eyes burning from staring at lines of code. Sometimes I'd look at my personal budget and see exactly $300 left, and wonder how much longer I could hold on. Then, one Tuesday morning, as I was filling the kettle, my laptop pinged with a new email. The sender's address was unfamiliar, initiative.greenlight@greencorepartners.net. I opened it, thinking it might be spam, but it wasn't. The email explained that the sender represented an independent initiative handling pilot projects for GreenCore, the National Energy Corporation. They had come across several papers I had published in a regional engineering journal and were deeply impressed by my decentralized energy analysis framework. At the bottom was an invitation to collaborate. They wanted me to act as a strategic consultant, anonymously, for a nationwide energy transition planning program focused on 3 Western states. I read that email more than 10 times. Everything was legitimate. There was a confidentiality clause, a specific compensation plan. Not extravagant, but enough to keep me afloat for several months without selling anything else. Most importantly, I'd get to work directly with real data from regions I'd already studied. I typed out a reply, hands slightly trembling. I agree to participate under the condition that my name appears on no official documents due to maintaining Blue Root's independent legal status. They replied within the hour. Agreement confirmed. From that day on, I began receiving encrypted data packets. Big cities, small towns, suburban zones. Each location came with energy consumption stats, available sources, emission reduction targets, and a labyrinth of technical requests. I worked day and night building algorithms to assess transition potential, mapping out phased implementation, drafting cost forecasts and financial models. I sent each part of the report, receiving no reply other than the standard acknowledgement, received. No one knew my name, no one called, everything was routed through Green Corps' special secure platform. Almost 2 months later, a front-page article appeared in the National Energy Journal. Headline: Green Corps successfully launches Phase 1 of Energy Transition Strategy in Washington and Oregon. Below the headline was a photo of Austin, my brother-in-law, standing next to the CEO, shaking hands at a newly inaugurated solar farm. The article praised Austin as the strategic mind behind the breakthrough plan. I stared at that magazine page, not quite angry, not quite sad. It was something else entirely, like watching a stage play where the actor is reciting your lines, but no one knows you ever held the pen. He didn't know. He couldn't. All materials were submitted through the independent technical branch. My name was never mentioned. Something inside me went still, not because I needed applause, but because I realized sometimes in the dark, people can still light up an entire horizon without anyone knowing. And while others stood on stage receiving awards, I remained at my old wooden desk, watching the still waters of the lake and writing the next lines of code. I didn't have a fancy house, a sleek car, or any loud recognition, but I had freedom, and now I held the one thing none of them could ever buy: the ability to see the path the entire industry was slowly shifting toward. That morning started like any other in the small cabin by Lake Stevens. The sky was gray, fog blanketing the water. As I boiled water for coffee and opened my laptop to check emails, one stood out. The sender, lmorgan@greencore.org. The subject line read simply, "Private meeting, top priority." I opened it, pulse tightening. The message was short but formal. The sender introduced herself as Linda Morgan, Senior Strategic Advisor at Green Corps. She wrote that the executive board wanted to meet the person behind the consulting models for Project Greenlight. After reviewing 18 months of energy transition strategy, they had noticed that many of the key recommendations originated from one consistent source: Blue Root Strategies. And even though my name never appeared in the official presentations, cross-reference data patterns pointed clearly to a distinctive analytical style. At the end was a direct invitation: "We would like to meet with you in person." The meeting was set for 3 days later at Green Corps' headquarters in downtown Seattle. Linda emphasized that it was a closed-door meeting. No press, no recording. I prepared carefully. I wore a white button-down shirt and the same gray blazer I'd worn for Blue Root's first pitch. The shoes were worn but freshly polished. As I walked into Green Corps' marble-floored lobby, I felt like I'd entered another world, where polished stone reflected every step, where the oak scent from the front desk blended into the central air, and where I once believed only people like Austin belonged. Linda Morgan met me on the 18th floor. She wasn't what I expected. No luxury suit or sky-high heels. She wore a deep blue wool cardigan, had short gray hair, and sharp but warm eyes. "Serenity Blake," she said, shaking my hand with a steady gaze. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." I sat across from her in a small glass-walled conference room, overlooking Elliott Bay, shimmering in the late sunlight. Linda opened her laptop and turned the screen toward me. "This is the directional energy analysis for the West, the 2025 to 2035 strategy for Green Corps," she said. We realized the foundational modeling all traces back to the data streams from Blue Root. And now, the board wants you to lead the next phase under your own name. Before I could even react, she continued. Not as a contractor, not through a technical middleman, but as Green Corps' direct strategic partner. I looked at her, stunned. After all the sleepless nights, the drained savings account, the biting remarks from family, was I really being asked to take a seat at the strategic table of one of the largest energy firms in the United States? I asked, why now? Linda spoke slowly, thoughtfully. Because what you've built isn't just accurate, it's ahead of the curve. And because the man currently presenting those insights to the board, frankly, doesn't understand what he's delivering, I didn't need to ask. I knew exactly who she meant. Austin Miller, I said quietly. She nodded, eyes unapologetically direct. He's the face at the podium, but we've all sensed something's off. The content doesn't match the speaker. I exhaled, deep and quiet. Something unknotted inside me. Not because Austin had been found out, but because someone within the system finally saw the work I'd been quietly building. But the board won't accept a sudden change, Linda added. They want to meet you in a formal setting where everything is laid out clearly. I straightened my spine. Where? The National Energy Summit in San Francisco, 3 weeks from now. I froze. That summit was where CEOs, policymakers, and major investors gathered. It was the stage of familiar names from financial headlines. It was the very event Austin had proudly told our family he'd been invited to speak at just days after his 10th wedding anniversary with Rachel. Linda looked at me as if reading every hesitation in my heart. Austin will speak right before you. And this will be the first time the board hears directly from the person who actually created the strategy they've already invested hundreds of millions of dollars into. I didn't answer right away. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the whirlwind of emotion. Old fury still smoldered. The hunger to prove myself had never really quieted. And above all, a quiet conviction was rising inside me. Maybe this was the turn I had been waiting for. Linda closed her laptop. We're not pressuring you, but if you agree, Green Corps is ready to sign a strategic partnership memorandum right after the summit, and the name Serenity Blake will appear officially on every document. I looked out the glass window. The water shimmered gently as birds floated through the pale gray sky. I turned back and met her eyes. I'll be in San Francisco. That morning, the National Convention Center in San Francisco was packed. Booths gleamed with LED lights, showcasing new technologies. Hundreds of experts, investors, policymakers, and top energy CEOs had gathered. I walked through the main hall in a deep blue suit, my hair pinned up neatly, Linda's quiet voice still echoing in my ears. Just be yourself. You don't need to raise your voice. Truth carries its own weight. Austin Miller's name was announced first. He walked onto the grand stage with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The spotlight landed squarely on his expensive suit, and each step echoed across the polished wood floor. In the front rows, among them the Secretary of Energy and Coastal State Representatives, everyone leaned in to listen. Austin began with a calm voice, laced with just enough passion to leave an impression. He spoke about the urgency of renewable energy, about a low-carbon future for every small town in the West, and moved on to discuss integrated storage models and intelligent regional data analysis. He went on about budget allocations, investment priorities, and an AI-based simulation forecasting energy demand over the next 12 years. I sat quietly in the back, just close enough to see every slide on the massive screen, and every line of data, every chart appearing, was built inside my cabin by Lake Stevens. Every model mentioned, from wind turbine efficiency algorithms to environmental risk indexes, was in the report I submitted under the code name EV213. Austin closed with a statement that felt like a seal-on-barred achievement. I believe that with the strategy I've developed alongside my team, Green Corps can lead America's clean energy transition for the next 2 decades. The entire hall erupted in applause. I closed my eyes for a steady breath, then stood up. The event moderator announced, "Up next, please welcome a founder whose quiet work has transformed rural communities, Mrs. Serenity Blake, founding director of Blue Root Strategies." I walked onto the stage. Austin was just stepping down. Our eyes locked for a second. He froze mid-step. I met his gaze without a bow, without a smile. Just a slight nod, as if to say, "I know everything." My presentation didn't start with numbers or dazzling graphs. I opened with a photo, a small town in Montana where a crumbling energy grid once forced schools to close during winter. I don't come from a glass-paneled lab. I don't have a PR team or a marketing budget. I started in forgotten places. One by one, I introduced the models Blue Root had implemented: a solar storage system in Pueblo, Colorado, an electricity optimization algorithm for Fairfield, Idaho, a performance tracking network across 3 indigenous communities in Northern California. Each project came with real-world photos, resident testimonials, and measurable data results. The data from each town was encoded and submitted under the project name EV213. Those very analyses were later integrated into the strategy you just heard, from my brother-in-law. I said it evenly, my gaze fixed on Green Corps' executive board. Curiously, he had no idea that today's entire presentation, from diagrams to analysis, was built from reports I wrote. Not a single sound followed. Even the gentle tapping of pens and coughs stopped. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. I clicked to the final slide, a side-by-side comparison between the EV213 report and Austin's presentation. Line by line, a perfect match. At the bottom, the original submission timestamps, clear and dated, preceding Green Corps' official adoption of the material, ended with one simple sentence on the screen: "Recognizing the right person is the first step toward building the right future." I bowed my head, then stepped quietly off stage. Not into indifference, but into the silence of a room full of power, witnessing a truth that couldn't be denied. I left the San Francisco summit without saying a word to Austin. I didn't need to. Everything had already been said in the eyes of those hundreds of people, in the silence that lingered long after I stepped down. 3 days later, I received a call from the chairman of Green Corps' executive board, Mr. Thomas Avery. Serenity, his voice was steady and warm, the voice of a man who'd weathered many power shifts. "We owe you an apology and an opportunity." I said nothing. He continued, "Green Corps would like to offer you a long-term strategic advisory contract. 6 years. Total value, $15 million. You will have full authority to develop and oversee the energy transition network across the entire Western U.S. Every department involved will report directly to you." Oh. I leaned back in my chair, the Seattle afternoon light filtering through my cabin window. My home was still small, still beside the lake, but in that moment, everything changed. "I need all terms in writing," I replied calmly, "and the operations office must be based in Denver, 221 Fremont Street, 4th floor." There was a slight pause on the other end. Then Thomas chuckled. "The same office the previous board denied funding?" "Yes," I said. "Austin once told me it had no potential." "Then let's let that potential grow," he said, and the call ended. A week later, I arrived in Denver. The Fremont office looked like a half-finished memory. Years ago, I had proposed opening a consulting branch there, right in the heart of the city's new eco-energy zone near a research station and 3 technical universities. But Austin had shut it down cold. 4th floor has low ceilings, no sunlight, no private parking, he had said. No one wants to work in a place like that. I stood in the glass elevator, watching sunlight spill across the low-rise rooftops. Fremont had been renovated, but the 4th floor still had its signature exposed brick. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space nearly 3,000 square feet. Empty, smelling of fresh paint, light flooding across the red brick walls. I placed my hand on the large wooden desk at the center, the only piece of furniture I'd brought from the lake cabin. It was the same desk I'd stayed up at all night, writing the EV213 report, and now it was the command post for the Western U.S. energy strategy. I hired young engineers from the very towns Blue Route had once served. They didn't graduate from Ivy League schools. They were the kind of people who had lived through winters with no power and fixed solar panels with bare hands and raw determination. On opening day, I didn't host a ribbon cutting or give a grand speech. I just sent one email. Starting today, every energy transition plan will be written from the fourth floor of Fremont, no approval netted, beyond real data and measurable community outcomes. 3 weeks later, I received a call from someone I hadn't heard from in a long time. It was Rachel, my sister. Serenity? My sister's voice softened like she was afraid of her own words. I saw you on TV. Is it true that all the models Austin used were actually yours? I didn't respond right away. The ceiling fan spun slowly above me, and the afternoon light spilled across the wooden floor. I want to visit your office sometime, just to see where you work. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. Sure. Fremont, fourth floor. Bring a notebook if you want to understand. When she walked into the office that day, her eyes lingered on the map hanging in the center of the wall, the map of every town Blue Route had served, with green markers showing the exact spots where our systems were now running successfully. You did all of this by yourself? Not by myself, I corrected her, with communities your family never thought twice about. Rachel said nothing else. She sat quietly in the chair, one hand resting gently on the wooden table. And for the first time since I was that 15-year-old girl standing outside family parties, I saw something in her gaze that wasn't pity. It was a hint of gratitude, a trace of respect, and something close to regret. I was sitting by the window, watching the snow melt along the hillside behind our new Denver office, when the phone rang. Mom appeared on the screen. I hesitated, then picked up. She didn't ask many questions. She just spoke with a voice so soft I had to pause to hear it clearly. You confuse me, but I think I should say it. I'm proud of you. If you have time, maybe we could have dinner. Just the two of us. We met at a small Italian restaurant in Capitol Hill. The same one she took me to when I was 8 after I won first prize in an environmental art contest. I still remember her saying I had a green heart. But in the years after, that phrase vanished, replaced by cold remarks about my choices. When I walked into the restaurant, she was already there, dressed neatly, her gray hair pinned up, wearing the Cartier watch she usually saved for formal galas. Rachel wasn't there. I was glad. I needed the quiet. Mom didn't waste time. After dessert, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small red velvet box. Before I could ask, she slid it across the table. I think it's time you had this, she said. Your grandmother's bracelet. I once promised it to Rachel, but I changed my mind. I opened the box. The bracelet still gleamed, every link carefully preserved through the years. When I was little, I used to sit on Grandma's lap and play with it as she told stories about disappearing forests and plants native to America. She once told me, someday you'll be the one who carries the fire. I looked up to thank Mom, but before I could speak, Rachel's voice cut in from behind. Can we talk in private? The upstairs dining room was quiet, lit by the soft glow of a wall sconce. Rachel stood with her arms folded, lips pressed tightly together. I sat down across from her and waited. Do you have any idea what you just did? She asked, voice still low but full of anger. You made the whole family a joke. People are talking. You didn't just expose Austin. You humiliated Mom in front of her friends. Did you even think about the fallout? I looked her in the eye. Rachel, the one once called the family's shining star, always surrounded by applause. And me? Since the day I chose my own path, all I received was skepticism and silence. Yet now, I was the one shaking the old foundations. I didn't do anything, I replied calmly. I simply presented the work I've done, the things I've built. Everyone else chose to believe something else. That was their choice. Rachel's fists clenched. You could have come to me. Austin and I could have issued a joint statement, minimized the damage. I reached into my bag, pulled out the Green Corps contract, 8 pages, signed and sealed. I laid it gently on the table and rotated the title toward her. I don't need statements, and if you're concerned about damage, maybe think back to the times you laughed at me for living in a cabin, for selling my car, for telling Mom I was just testing out a tiny startup. Rachel looked down at the contract, then back up at me, her lips pressed together, silent. I stood, took the bracelet, slipped it into my bag, and left the room without looking back. Outside, the snow had started to fall, thin and quiet. I stepped onto the sidewalk and inhaled deeply. Each step forward felt lighter, not from revenge, but from a strange peace, as if I had just settled a debt I'd carried too long with myself. On a Saturday morning, while I was making coffee in the new office kitchen, my phone buzzed gently on the counter. I glanced at it. The number wasn't completely unfamiliar. The name above the message made my heart pause for a second. Caleb Anderson. I set the mug down, wiped my hands on the towel, and opened the text. It was an article from Energy Weekly, EV213, Strategy Becomes Cornerstone of Green Corps' 10-year plan. Below the headline was a photo of me on stage in San Francisco, pointing at the self-sufficient town energy model. The message was short. I used to think you'd never be grounded enough to build something lasting. I was wrong. I'm truly sorry, Serenity. I sat down on the wooden chair beside my desk and placed the phone on my lap. Caleb, who had been with me for 3 years, shared evenings of blueprints and solar-powered dreams, and also the one who packed up silently, leaving behind a handwritten note. I need someone who puts stability first. Your startup is too vague for me. I once believed those words would leave a scar that never healed. But now, reading his message, I felt nothing but stillness. No rage, no forgiveness either. Just clarity. Like a quiet lake on a windless day. I typed back slowly, carefully. Every step I took, even after you turned away, led me exactly where I needed to be. And without you, I got there faster. I hit send, then turned off the screen. The coffee had cooled slightly, but the flavor remained strong. I stepped out onto the balcony where the solar panels sparkled in the morning sun. It was here 2 years ago. I was denied funding because Austin claimed your plan isn't commercially viable. I remember staying up all night, tweaking every detail in the energy model for a lakeside town. My only light, the flicker of a headlamp in the old cabin. And now, from this same balcony, I could see the Green Corps project team's electric vehicle pulling into the lot. They were here to plan phase 2 of the Northwest Energy Network. The lead today was a young engineer from Colorado Springs who once emailed me asking for an internship. I still remembered how he ended his message. I grew up in a town with power outages every winter. I want to do something that changes that. I walked back inside, picked up the new strategy folder, and set it on the meeting table. Caleb once wanted me in a house with a white fence and predictable loan payments. He said, "You can be brilliant, Serenity, but brilliance means nothing without stability." I used to believe that too, but now I understand. Stability isn't standing still, it's standing strong, even in headwinds. It's not letting someone else's doubt redraw your life's map. That message may have been an apology, but to me, it felt like a period. Soft, final, and beyond it stretched an open sky. One early weekday morning, just after I signed off on a series of subcontractor agreements to deploy energy systems across 3 new counties in northern Nevada, my assistant Nora walked in, looking both surprised and slightly uncomfortable. "New Serenity. There's a new applicant for the head of CSR position, but I think you'll want to see the name first." I put down my pen and took the folder from her hands. On the cover, printed neatly, Rachel Bennett. I stared at that name for a few seconds, then flipped quickly to the first page. No mistake. Full name, address, personal email. It was my sister. I leaned back in my chair, quiet. Rachel, the same person who once told me environmental work was for kids who hadn't entered the real world? was now applying to lead the sustainability department at Green Corps. And under the new org chart, that role would report directly to me. I said nothing to Nora except a short nod. Schedule the interview. I'll personally sit in on the final round. Friday morning, the meeting room on the 6th floor was awash in natural light from the tall windows overlooking downtown Denver. I arrived early, rearranged the documents, adjusted the mic, and double-checked the presentation content. When Rachel walked in, I was already seated at the head of the table beside two members of the hiring panel. She wore a pale gray blazer, her hair softly curled as usual, but there was a noticeable tightness in her expression. She froze for a moment when she saw me, her eyes locking onto mine. I returned the look and tilted my head slightly. "Please have a seat, Miss Bennett." She reluctantly sat down, placing her leather bag on the chair beside her. One of the panelists began with the usual questions about community engagement experience, past CSR projects, and environmental initiatives she'd participated in while working for a nonprofit in Seattle. I sat silently, taking notes, occasionally nodding, showing no emotion. When it was my turn, I looked her in the eye, fingers resting lightly on the table. "What do you think is the single most important factor in shifting corporate thinking around energy?" Rachel leaned back slightly, visibly startled. I saw the hesitation flicker in her eyes. That old instinct of hers to search for the right answer instead of the honest one hadn't changed. She pressed her lips together, glanced at the two people seated beside me, then turned her gaze back. I believe it's responsibility. The responsibility companies have to both the community and the environment. They must listen and adapt. I kept my expression neutral. I didn't challenge her. But anyone who'd worked in the trenches of this industry could hear it. That answer was hollow. I asked again, my tone now lower, sharper. "Anything else? A concrete example? Can you name a model or campaign that you personally led, from design to impact measurement?" Her face flushed slightly. I knew her resume listed a collaboration with a high school to host a green living fair, but the truth was she'd only served as a ceremonial guest at the opening. All the real work had been done by interns. I think we should focus more on communication, image building, because sometimes public perception matters more than just the technical indicators." I interrupted gently, still composed. "So you believe, for instance, if a town doesn't have a single EV charging station, posting green-themed photos on social media would solve their clean energy access?" The air in the room went still. One of the panelists cleared his throat, shifting his gaze between her and me. Rachel clenched her hands in her lap. I watched her throat move as she swallowed hard. Her voice came out soft, almost a whisper. "Serenity. I didn't know you'd be here today." I straightened, cold. "I'm the regional executive for Green Corps' Western Grid. Every strategic hire passes through my desk." Rachel lowered her head, eyes falling to the folder. I said nothing else. I let the silence do the work. She once said I was just a dreamer chasing windmills, while she knew how to build a real image. But image doesn't power homes. It doesn't listen to the way the wind cuts across a Wyoming valley to site a turbine. It doesn't help farmers in Arizona earn income from selling solar power back to the grid. When the interview ended, I didn't shake hands. I just nodded, stood, and gathered my notes. Rachel walked out quietly. Even with the door closed behind her, I could still hear the sound of her footsteps brushing down the long, carpeted hall. I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt something clearer than ever before. That the judgments from my own family no longer defined the path I walked. And today, I was the one asking the questions, no longer waiting for approval. That night, Seattle wore a completely different face. Glass buildings along the lakeshore reflected the massive words stretched across the top floor, honoring Serenity West, Energy Strategist of the Year. On a towering LED screen in the city's central plaza, my face appeared against the night sky. Hair falling loosely, eyes meeting the camera directly. No longer the girl who sat quietly at family dinners unnoticed. This time, it was me, the one reshaping how America imagines the future of clean energy. At the National Conference Center, the stage lights beamed down on the main hall where I stood, the laser-etched green kite symbol behind me. In the front rows, the room was filled to capacity. Federal representatives, major investors, and my family. My mother wore a deep purple gown, her hair styled up like on the big occasions from my childhood. My father, the one who always told neighbors I was just trying out unstable things, wore a black tie, sat upright, hands folded neatly on his knees. Rachel sat one seat away. She didn't clap, she didn't bow her head, but she didn't walk out either. The event host introduced me with a voice that carried both weight and warmth. He spoke of towns once dependent on oil that now offered free EV charging, of native communities now empowered to run their own wind farms, systems built with guidance from my team, of thousands of low-income families in Colorado, Utah, and Nevada using independent solar systems, free from burdensome monthly bills. I walked onto the stage in a simple black dress. No fringe, no sequins, just a silver bracelet around my wrist, the one my mother had handed to me the night we had dinner. I scanned the crowd, pausing for a moment at the front row, at the one who used to doubt me the most. Now, watching without blinking, I took a deep breath. I used to be labeled a failure, a dreamer, the daughter who didn't follow the right path. In my 20s, I left home with just a few belongings and an old laptop. I once lived in a cabin without electric heating, installing solar panels with my own hands, paid for by selling the only car I owned. The entire room fell silent, and I'll never forget what a relative once said to me. "Are you ever going to settle down?" The answer is yes, it's just that my idea of settling down never looked like what they imagined. A wave of applause broke out. I saw my parents stand, my mother wiped her eyes, and my father, the same man who never left his seat during anyone else's graduation, was now clapping without pause. I continued, my voice slower, deeper. Not everyone is born with the chance to stand on a stage like this, but I believe sometimes the very people deemed useless, unrealistic, hard to understand, are the ones rewriting the future for an entire generation. I paused. My eyes found the row where Rachel was sitting. She looked at me, not with hostility, but with a stillness like the surface of a late autumn lake. I spoke the final line in English because it was the message I wanted future generations to remember. Sometimes the biggest victory is not proving them wrong. It's building something so right they can't look away. The spotlight focused squarely on me, blurring out everyone else around. But I could see clearly that something inside me had closed. Not revenge, not conquest, but affirmation that the path I chose, no matter how steep or shadowed, had been the right one all along. My story might just be one small slice of what family means, of misunderstandings, expectations, and the silent wounds we sometimes carry for a lifetime. But maybe all of us have faced that same choice at some point. Stay quiet to keep the peace, or walk away to find ourselves, even when the road ahead is lonely and uneven. What do you think about Serenity's journey? About the distance that seems impossible to bridge in a family, but sometimes all it takes is a single moment to change everything. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your story too. What you've overcome, what you're quietly enduring. If this story moved you, if you've ever seen yourself in the silent gaze of a relative or in the quiet footsteps of someone rebuilding life from nothing, hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. Because behind every closed door is a journey worth telling, and sometimes a single honest story is enough to warm even the coldest heart.